Cumbia. Even if you've never heard of it, you've probably heard it before. But then again, if you clicked on this video, then you're probably trying to learn how to make it. Cumbia started out in Colombia hundreds of years ago, and the kind of fascinating thing is that no one has really been able to trace it back to a specific year or even a specific time period when it started. But today, cumbia is a very relevant genre in Latin America. There are tons of subgenres to it. Each Latin American country kind of has their own variant. So I would say what makes a cumbia is the guacharaca rhythm, which if you don't know what a guacharaca is, it's kind of like a scraper that was invented in northern Colombia in the Santa Marta region to imitate a bird that's called the guacharaca. And so basically it's like a but a lot of other countries use different instruments to imitate the sound, such as the guira or the guiro. And basically it doesn't matter because it's serving that same purpose, so it's kind of a matter of personal taste. This is what makes a cumbia is that rhythm. And while it may sound easy to program on your DAW, it's actually off the grid. So it's not as simple as you may think. It's not an 8th note and 2 16th notes. I mean, technically it is, but it's off the grid. So I'm gonna show you guys a trick to get a very authentic sounding cumbia. So yeah, let's head on over to Ableton and I can show you how to do that. All right, so here we are in Ableton. I'm going to quickly demonstrate how maybe a rookie would approach the guacharaca pattern that I was talking about. For all intents and purposes, this is a quantized guacharaca cumbia rhythm. Okay, that doesn't groove at all. That is not what we want. And actually, we're going to be doing guira, not guiro. The bad news is that I tried experimenting with it, and basically, I think the best solution I came up with, at least, is that you'll have to purchase a loop. I know that's not what you want to hear, but I think that's the best solution. So I went to bigfishaudio.com and I bought the new Cumbia sample pack. It cost me $12.87. I only bought the percussion pack because I only really wanted this guiro loop. So here's the one I usually use. That's it. So this is the one I use. So what we're gonna do here, we can get rid of these and we'll make a new audio track. Call it Guacharaca. And I think it's actually the Guacharaca, but I've been calling it the Guacharaca for so long now that we're just not going to worry about that. So I was watching some videos here on YouTube, and I guess this Guacharaca part is actually originally performed on the maracas. But like I said in the intro, it doesn't matter because it serves the same function. So that's what we want. But you might say, so this is at 90 BPM, but Robert, what if I want this at a different BPM? Well, I mean, the most obvious option would be to use that warp feature, but let's take a listen. Okay, so it's not that obvious here, but kind of what I've found and the conclusion I've reached is that this is not the best way to go about doing this. So maybe if we slow it down, you hear that like crackling there? Yeah, so we don't want that. So the conclusion I've reached, and we're going to undo all this. The conclusion I've reached is that it's better to actually convert this to MIDI and then you have all those transients and go from there. So we're going to do that. Bounce to new track. Slice to new MIDI track. There we go. I don't know why you have to bounce it to a new track, but I guess Ableton It's just being difficult. Okay, so just the default settings here. And bam, there you have it. So get rid of these. You don't need these. Call this Guacharaca, or Guacharaca, I guess it's called. So last thing I wanted to make a comment about, and we can just do this. Okay, so this is pretty important, so pay attention. If you're going to use a bass drum in your track, which I'm assuming most of you will, you do want to quantize these quarter note transients here. Okay, so it would be just those two, right? So we're just repeating that same 2 bars over and over again. So we could do 8 bars. Yeah, we'll leave it like that for now. So basically, the bass drum needs to do that quarter note pulse. So it's going to sound kind of weird if you don't have your guacharaca lined up exactly with that bass drum. Okay, moving on, I'm going to make this a bass drum. Bass, or we could call it kick to avoid confusion with the bass. So I actually have a kick here. Let's do it as a drum rack. Drum rack. Okay, so this is a matter of personal preference. I like a punchy bass drum. Others may prefer a more subtle bass drum, or the really interesting thing is I think a lot of more traditional cumbia groups, they don't even use bass drum at all. So if you listen to Los Angeles Azules or La Sonora Dinamita, they don't have bass drum in their songs. You don't miss it. It's really bizarre. The bass provides so much low end that the bass drum's completely unnecessary. I think for our purposes, maybe as producers, electronic music producers, and making cumbia on a computer, that's not as realistic. It just doesn't sound right. But it's something you can experiment with. In cumbia music, the bass drum is a supporting character. It is not going to be a protagonist. So don't try and get creative. You're just going to want to follow the bass. All right, so moving on to our next instrument. It's going to be congas. Let's go to this IVS conga sample pack. Okay, so that's not a great sound to me, but we're going to go with it. So get another drum rack. I would start with just 2 conga samples that you think sound good in succession and just go from there. Let's go to our next instrument, a cowbell / woodblock. And obviously these are 2 different instruments. For the purpose of this tutorial, we are going to put them on the same track. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that, but yeah, just to make it a little more streamlined. So here's a woodblock that we can use in our drum rack, which of course I haven't added. Drum rack. Okay, go to Cumbia. So woodblock. And we got a cowbell. And this cowbell sample I got from this company called, why is that kind of, that's annoying. They didn't have it, oops. Yeah, I don't know why they didn't have the sample starting at the very beginning. That doesn't seem very professional. Anyways, the cowbell's from a website called Ableton. But I do like the cowbell noise. You just have to, make sure the waveform is at the very beginning. Otherwise, you're gonna, you don't want that delay. There we go. Okay, and the woodblock and cowbell are best used sparingly. You don't want them to be constant like the guacharaca is. All right, that takes us to building the beat. So I'm going to actually use the session view. Okay, so the session view, for those of you unfamiliar, it's kind of what differentiates Ableton from the rest of the DAWs out there. And basically, it lets you kind of trigger your parts on the fly, which is pretty cool, especially in a live setting, but you can also do it for recording. So here's our Guacharaca part, and we're gonna delete these. Delete. Deleted. So this is gonna be a 1-bar loop. Okay, and there's a lot we can do with this. So we're gonna call this straight. So here's a variation. This is gonna be our first variation. And what I've heard a lot of Cumbia kind of do is get rid of this middle, that middle transient there, the and of the beat. So that leaves us with this. Just for a little variation, really. So we're going to call this one variation A. And we're going to duplicate that. Call this one variation B. How about we do it like this? Da, 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 da. So that's kind of, you know. And then variation C, which is just going to be quarter notes. So we can switch between these on the fly. And yeah, I think you get the point. And I'm going to do a kick drum. We're going to do 2 kick drum patterns. One's going to be quarter notes. We'll call this one quarters. And then the other one's just going to be half time. And there we go, that's that. All right, so for the congas, this is where we can get really creative here. So these are always going to be on the offbeat. So we can do something like that. Sounds like. And then we can, and it's kind of hard to give these good names because, you know, it's hard to describe them with words, I guess. We can call this variation B. And this is just going to be literally the inverse. So, okay, and then we could do, oops, didn't want to do that. We can do something like this where we have 2 and then 1 and then 2 and then 1. So see how that sounds? Okay, and then, you know, we can do, and I guess that would be variation C. We could do that same thing, but inversed. So again, the possibilities are endless. We're just going to leave it at that for now. Call this variation D, I guess. Okay, and the cowbell and woodblock. This is where it gets a little interesting. So we can have this one. We can call it cowbell quarters, and literally just have it cowbell quarters. And we can do the same thing with the woodblock. So duplicate that. We call it woodblock quarters and move that down. Okay, and then so this next part's a little tricky. You're gonna have to copy and paste these transients from the Guacharaca. So I think it would be those, right? Oh, no, it would be these. So copy, and then we're going to do a duplicate. And basically what I'd recommend here is like kind of an alternating. So keep the woodblock on the quarter notes and then kind of have this. And is that lining up? I'm wondering. Okay, so maybe the best thing would be to just copy this whole price or whole sale or whatever the hell that
expression is, and then you're going to paste it in here, and that kind of guarantees that it's going to line up, if you will. Move this down here, move this down here, move this down here, and move that down there. So we're left with so I'm going to duplicate that, and we're just going to switch parts. So the woodblock's going to go up to the quarter note. This is going to go down. This is going to go up. Oops. See, that's what I don't like about Ableton, is when stuff like that happens. Okay, so okay, so there you have it, folks. I really just wanted to show you the amount of possibilities there are in Cumbia. And I mean, this is only, the sky's the limit.